Committee will come to order. We'll start with our opening statements and then get right to our first panel. Ms. Administrator, we appreciate you being here today. The delayed public notification of serious safety risk of the Chevy Volt raises significant concerns regarding the politicized relationship between the Obama administration and General Motors. The Obama administration intervened and forced the company to participate in a politically orchestrated process. The result was that GM emerged as a quasi-private entity. To this day, the U.S. government still owns 26% of the company. In addition to significant ownership stake in the company, President Obama has used this unusual blurring of public and private sector boundaries to openly tout the results of this partnership as a top accomplishment of his administration, creating a dynamic where the President is politically reliant on the success of General Motors. Most recently, this relationship was touted at last night's State of the Union address. The President has backed this support with taxpayer dollars, providing $7,500 tax credits for the purchase of the Volt and other electric vehicles, as well as billions of dollars to support the domestic production of batteries. In addition, total federal, state, and local governments have subsidized the production of the Volt to the tune of estimates between $50,000 and $250,000 per vehicle sold. The question before the committee is to what extent this conflict of interest has influenced the way in which this administration has approached its duty to inform consumers about the apparent risk that GM Chevy Volt can catch fire. While it remains to be seen whether GM has received special treatment during NHTSA's investigation of the Volt fire, it is clear that the administration has tremendous incentives to protect the political investment it has made in the company and the vehicle. In the face of that political dependency, it is deeply troubling that the public notification of the safety concerns related to the Volt were inexplicably delayed for 6 months, a period of time that also coincides with the negotiation over the new fuel economy standards. It is also troubling that during a subcommittee hearing, this very subcommittee in October 2011, where Mr. Strickland was directly asked to respond to members' concerns about the safety of advanced vehicle technologies, he did not inform the committee of the Volt battery fire. This information was very germane to the questions asked of Mr. Strickland and certainly would have been of interest to committee members. But for a resourceful Bloomberg reporter who reported on the fire in November of 2011, it is unclear whether NHTSA would have ever made news of the Volt fire public. It appears that it was this story that prompted NHTSA to acknowledge the fire's occurrence and later to open a safety defect investigation. In addition, the subcommittee is also concerned about the preparedness of NHTSA to regulate electric vehicles. In his 2011 State of the Union address, President Obama set the goal of 1 million electric vehicles on the roads by 2015. Despite the government's strong encouragement of this technology, there was a fundamental lack of knowledge at NHTSA about how to handle an electric vehicle after it has been involved in a crash. This fire risk associated with the lithium-ion technology is well known, yet the engineers at NHTSA failed to drain the charge from the battery, creating the hazardous situation which ultimately led to the explosion. It appears that this lack of knowledge was caused by a lack of preparation. According to documents obtained by the committee, NHTSA only inquired about manufacturers' post-vehicle crash procedures in September of 2011, 4 months after the Volt fire. This evidence strongly suggests that the agency had not paid sufficiently close attention to the unique safety risk associated with the lithium-ion battery technologies in cars before the Volt fire occurred. This lack of knowledge of how to respond to an electric vehicle fire is unnerving. It also prompts questions about whether or not this administration is promoting the rapid distribution of electric vehicles like the Volt before we have done our homework and understand how the risk associated with these vehicles should be addressed. I look forward to hearing the testimony of Mr. Strickland, Administrator of NHTSA, and I hope that Mr. Strickland is more forthcoming today than he was when he last appeared before us. I also look forward to the testimony of Mr. Ackerson, the Chief Executive Officer of General Motors. And with that, I now yield to my friend and colleague and the ranking member, Mr. Kucinich from Ohio.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for holding this hearing, and I always appreciate the opportunity to work with you. Today, we again welcome David Strickland, the Administrator of the National Highway Safety Administration, before our subcommittee. At 2 other recent hearings, this subcommittee heard testimony from Department of Transportation officials, first on regulations proposed by the Department related to standards for vehicle fuel efficiency, and then on the number of hours truck drivers can work between mandatory rest periods. At those hearings, the majority criticized the Department of Transportation for considering stricter regulations claiming they were harmful to business and the economy. Today, by contrast, the question is whether the Department of Transportation was strict enough in its regulatory oversight of one product, the Chevy Volt electric vehicle by General Motors. The title of today's hearing is, What did NHTSA know about the Volt vehicle fire, and when did they know it? A very detailed 135-page final report by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, on its investigation into the Volt battery fire incident, which was made public on Friday, provides detailed answer to the question this hearing seems to ask. GM has also provided extensive documentation of meetings and information it provided NHTSA pursuant to its investigation into the causes of the Volt battery fire that occurred after crash testing. Based on what we know so far, NHTSA's new car assessment program appeared to do just what it is intended to do: catch potential safety concerns with new cars before they become a risk to consumers. And General Motors appeared to do exactly what we hoped it would do. Even before NHTSA determined whether or not there was a real safety issue, it designed improvements to the Volt to make its battery better protected from risk of intrusions or fires. So far, we have seen no evidence to support the implication that NHTSA has allowed politics to guide its decision-making. And I understand my Chairman raising that question, because there's safety issues here at risk. Considering that in the last few months, there have been efforts by the majority to defund programs that support the development of technologies for electric and alternative fuel vehicles and other proposals to take away tax incentives for purchasing electric cars, I am concerned that an effect of this hearing could be to undermine technology that's critical to both protecting the environment and ensuring the success of the U.S. auto manufacturing industry, as well as to generally have an adverse effect on the U.S. economic competitiveness. It would be very bad, I think, for our economy to do anything that would try to demolish the potential for electric vehicles. As we established at the hearing this subcommittee held on the proposed fuel economy and greenhouse gas emission standards, clean vehicle technologies protect public health by cutting air pollutants, smog, and climate change pollution. Additionally, developing clean vehicle technologies for battery electric and hybrid cars has grown jobs on the assembly line and supported the recovery of the domestic automotive industry. We don't want to be buying lithium-ion batteries from China in 5 years when we can develop the infrastructure and skills to make them here in the United States. And we want to build cars here in the United States that are attractive to consumers in other countries. The President talked about that yesterday in his State of the Union address. This is where electric and other clean vehicle technologies have already established market share. Now, let me be clear. I'm well known as a consumer advocate. I support early public disclosure of safety risks, and I hope and expect that NHTSA consistently works as quickly as possible to make intelligent assessments of any safety risks and to disclose them to consumers as soon as possible. And, Mr. Chairman, in a meeting that I had yesterday with General Motors CEO and Chairman, I told the gentleman of the same concerns for early disclosure and transparency of the kind that we know we didn't have with Toyota. So we have an obligation to ask these questions. And we also have an obligation to rely on facts as they are. And as the majority wanted to work with me to craft stricter laws mandating that, I might join them. I hope this committee's activity on this issue, and I just want to excuse us for that interruption. I want to be very clear on this, that I wouldn't want this committee's activity on this issue to discourage companies like GM from continuing to innovate and advance technologies that will ensure U.S. competitiveness, And while it appears that we have different opinions with respect to whether the Chevy Volt is a fiery failure or an innovative success, at least it appears we have an agreement that there is a proper role for government to play in regulating business and ensuring public safety. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let us proceed.
I thank the gentleman for his statement and for his great work on the committee. We now would yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strickland, thanks for being here today. My concern, it has nothing to do with General Motors. General Motors has a history of building the most wonderful cars in the world. And I go back to the days when former President Bush had made a statement that said, if we could just start, if General Motors just start building cars that were relevant, they wouldn't have their problems. And at the time, we were the leading manufacturer and seller of vehicles on the planet. So sometimes there's a disconnect between what we say and what we do. My concern today is not so much with General Motors, because my association with General Motors goes back to 1953 when my father became a dealer, and back to the early 30s when he was a parts picker in a General Motors warehouse and had the opportunity to move forward with not only his life, but our families in establishing a dealership and being somewhat successful with the combined efforts of a lot of people over those years. My problem today has to do with your agency. And certainly it comes down to a question of trust. And one of the things that I see all the time, whether I'm in Washington, D.C. or back home in my district, or whether I'm in my dealership, can I trust you? Can I trust you to do what you said you were going to do? Can I trust you to do the best thing for me and in my best interest all the time? And it's about trust. And we know that you can spend your whole life building trust. And one misjudgment, one false step, you can destroy an entire legacy. And certainly with the passing of Joe Paterno last week, we saw a gentleman who spent his whole life establishing a legacy and lost it in the last 2 months of that life. Now, with your agency, the formation of it was to protect the public and to work in their best interest. When I look at the definition of trust, assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something, one in which confidence is placed. Firm reliance on the integrity, the ability, or the character of a person or a thing. Deals with custody and care. Something committed into the care of another. And that's where the disconnect comes. I have no problem with General Motors because General Motors acted very quickly once your agency let them know what happened. And if we were to look at some of the slides, if we could, slide 11 and slide 12, and if they're available. Now, this happened with the car that you folks tested. And I want to find out, when you look at the timeline, when did you let General Motors know this? Because General Motors has not had that problem out on the highway with these cars. We only had it in the testing. But again, it comes down to that trust. Whose best interest were you acting in? And certainly if it was the American public, and it was with a manufacturer who has 100-and-some-year history of building the best products in the world when it comes to transportation, why not get on the phone and ask them? Now, my association with General Motors is very strong. I am not a Volt dealer, and I'm not a Volt dealer only because the Volt does not appeal to people in my marketplace. And I have some other things I'll bring forward later on, but I got to tell you, I really am disturbed with the fact that this happened so early on, and yet the full disclosure of it happened by chance from a reporter, not from the agency that's out there to protect the public. And so we ask then, why is this erosion of trust there? Why do people no longer trust Congress? Why do they no longer trust our form of government? Why do they no longer trust things that have taken years to build? And it comes down to incidents that question them, that cause them to question what it is that happened. So I'm hoping today, because we talked to you early on, what did NHTSA know? When did it know it? And when did they let General Motors know that? My friends at General Motors have always been very responsive. They've always acted very quickly in the best interest of the public and those people that they serve. I understand that. What I don't get, why so long? And my question comes down very frankly. Is the commitment to the American public, or is it a commitment to an administration whose agenda is we are going to get to green technology one way or the other, and I don't care if we have to use the Department of Defense to get there. I don't care who we have to use to get this alternative energy, and I'm all for it, by the way. But when the market is ready for the science, it won't have to be subsidized. It will go on its own. So I'm hoping today that we can talk about this and talk about it in an open forum so the American public can again have the trust that it needs to have in the people that they send to represent them, in the agencies that were formed, at least in the beginning, to protect those folks that rely on us, and not to protect an agenda or to push an agenda forward that, quite frankly, think that someday we will use electric cars. But going back to the beginning, the problem with electric cars was always that, where do you store the energy source? And how efficient is it, and how economical is it, and how do you drive that? So that's what I'm here to hear what you have to say. And as we look at what happened in these cases, it didn't happen with anybody. There was no loss of life or limb. Nobody was injured. I just wish you would have called GM the same day you found that out, because they would have, I guarantee you, within 48 hours had the same fix that they ended up with. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his insightful opening remarks. Administrator Strickland, the rules of the committee require us to swear in our witnesses. If you'll please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that the witness answered in the affirmative. And the floor is yours, Mr. Strickland. You've done this before. You get 5 minutes, give or take a few seconds, and we're pretty lenient with that. So, fire away.
On the status of the Volt investigation. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have done this before, but of course I forget to hit the button. I am pleased to share that we have recently closed our investigation without finding evidence of an unreasonable risk to safety. Before I discuss the events that led to this determination, I would like to establish some context. One way we reduce traffic deaths and injuries is by setting and enforcing standards for motor vehicles. We test many of the vehicles on the road to ensure that they comply with these standards. However, the fact that a vehicle complies with all of the standards does not necessarily indicate the absence of an unreasonable risk to safety. The agency's ability to investigate and determine whether such a risk exists is key to getting defective vehicles recalled and remedied. It is within this context that the agency undertook the preliminary fact-finding task which led to the formal investigation of the Volt. To be clear, the first priority and the core mission of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is safety. I have the honor of leading more than 600 professionals who collectively have one goal in mind: to help the American public get to their destination safely every single trip. When we learned of the fire at the NHTSA facility in June, we had no relevant real-world data to help us assess the safety risk and no clear understanding of how the fire began. The agency took numerous unprecedented steps to ascertain the real-world risk to Volt owners and passengers, and then to isolate the root cause of this incident to determine if a defect existed that posed an unreasonable risk to safety. The technical team at NHTSA, working in collaboration with the Department of Energy and Defense, used every second over the past 6 months to provide the data needed for the agency decision, and they delivered in an innovative and expert fashion. If at any time during this period I had any notion that an imminent safety risk existed to the American public, I would have ensured that the public knew of that risk immediately. We at NHTSA rely on data to drive our decisions. As I noted in my written statement, we undertook several Volt crash tests in an attempt to replicate the June incident. In addition, the agency reviewed all the crash reports in the field involving Volts. We found no reports of post-crash fires. We looked at a variety of data sources, including all relevant early warning reporting data and vehicle owner questionnaires. The agency found no indication of a post-fire crash risk in the Volt, nor were we able to recreate the June incident at the vehicle level. Despite the initial negative results and the lack of real-world events, we decided to continue investigating at the component level and shared our initial thoughts with the public on this in November. NHTSA engineers analyzed the Volt to understand what caused the penetration into the battery compartment. We then created new component-level testing procedures and designed and constructed completely new and unique test mechanisms to replicate the intrusion that occurred during the May crash test. In mid-November, NHTSA tested 3-volt lithium-ion battery packs by damaging the battery compartment and rupturing the coolant system. On November the 24th, one of the battery packs that was tested a week earlier caught fire at the testing facility, burning the shed that housed it. The next day, NHTSA opened a formal defect investigation of post-crash fire risks in volts. It is important to note that the agency rarely opens a defect investigation without data from real-world incidents. By taking this uncommon step, NHTSA sought to ensure the safety of the driving public. In response to the defect investigation, GM proposed a field fix to mitigate intrusion by adding a reinforcement collar around the battery compartment. Our technical team reviewed and tested the remedy and confirmed that there was no intrusion into the battery compartment, no leakage of coolant, and no post-impact fire. As a result, we have concluded the agency's investigation and found no discernible defect trend. NHTSA continues to believe that electric vehicles show great promise as a safe and fuel-efficient option for American drivers. Based on the available data, NHTSA does not believe that Volts or other electric vehicles pose a greater risk of fire than gasoline-powered vehicles. In fact, all vehicles that have some risk of fire in the event of a serious crash. However, electric vehicles have specific attributes that should be made clear to consumers, law enforcement, emergency response communities, and tow truck operators in storage facilities. NHTSA has been working with the Department of Energy with assistance from the National Fire Protection Association and others to develop guidance to help them identify vehicles powered by lithium-ion batteries and to take the appropriate steps in handling these following a crash. We have also been working with the manufacturers to develop appropriate post-crash protocols dealing with lithium-ion battery-powered vehicles. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm now happy to answer questions from the committee.
Thank you, Administrator. Let me just start with the, excuse me, the timeline. When did you, give me the date you first learned at NHTSA of the fire concerns of the explosion that took place in the test?
I was notified, and the agency was notified on June the 6th.
June the 6th.
Of 2001.
And was this the same time that you, along with the EPA, were working on finalizing, or not, maybe not finalizing, but negotiating the CAFE standards? There's
Lots of work that goes on between the agencies.
But isn't it true you were working on negotiating the CAFE standards?
We were working on the CAFE standards at that time. That is correct.
And isn't it true that the proposed CAFE regulations rely heavily on the sale and deployment of vehicles, electric vehicles like the Volt?
Actually, that's not true. Actually, by statute, NHTSA is forbidden from actually using electric vehicle technology.
But don't you count on reaching to get to 54 miles per gallon? Don't you count on the sale of these kind of vehicles, this kind of technology in the future, helping to reach those standards?
There are several vehicle technology pipelines to achieve the standards, and frankly, most of the manufacturers are using internal combustion engines to achieve those standards.
The proposed rules specifically talk about electric vehicles. The administration has talked heavily about this vehicle, so it's certainly true that these were included in getting to that standard.
For NHTSA's CAFE regulations, it is illegal for us to consider electric vehicles as part of our technology mix. So therefore, we look at the technology pipelines that are available to the manufacturers to comply with our standards, and therefore, we are very satisfied that the standards can be met, as are the manufacturers.
But certainly the EPA is counting on this.
There are several technology pipelines that can be used to achieve the standards.
We got it. Okay. And isn't it true that the administration has heavily touted vehicles like the Volt as alternative vehicles that could help meet or surpass the fuel efficiency targets?
The Obama administration believes in American innovation, and anything that helps support American manufacturing and innovation is something that is a keystone.
Fair to say this administration feels pretty strongly about technology like this helping to get to these standards, helping with the future of the automobile industry.
The Obama administration feels that electric vehicle technologies have shown great promise.
Now, when did you testify before Congress on the CAFE standards? Do you remember?
I believe I was before you, Mr. Jordan, in October of last year.
October of last year. Okay. So you were aware of the safety concerns when you were developing and negotiating the CAFE standards?
There was no safety concern from part of the agency at the time regarding the Chevrolet Volt, because we were still in the process of figuring out the root cause and whether this posed an unreasonable risk.
So, but let me just, when you came in front of Congress, when you came in front of this committee, that picture Mr. Kelly had shown had taken place, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. All right. And so you were aware of the safety concerns when the President announced on July 29th of last summer the negotiated agreement on the CAFE standards?
There was no conclusion about whether there was an unreasonable risk of safety posed by the Chevrolet Volt. We were still in an investigation process.
I get all that. I'm just asking, you knew about it.
I knew of the fact that
You
the
knew about
Chevrolet
that
Volt
picture.
was
Wait.
involved in 4 vehicles catching
You
fire.
knew about that
during the
picture, that explosion, when you came in front of Congress, and you knew about it when the President talked about the agreement with the manufacturers on the CAFE standards, correct?
We knew of the incident on June the 6th. Yes, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Obvious question. Why didn't you tell? Well, let me do one other point. If you recall, during that hearing, Mr. Kelly and Ms. Burkle asked specific questions about the Chevy Volt and about safety concerns and about reaching these standards, and you didn't feel it was appropriate to let us know that there was an explosion with pictures like that?
There was no agency decision as to whether there was an unreasonable risk of safety in the Chevrolet Volt. My understanding is Mr. Kelly and the Vice Chairwoman was asking me about mass reduction in the CAFE standards. They made no question about it.
Just to think about it. We're talking about safety. We're talking about CAFE standards. You know that there has been a safety concern with the battery in the Volt leading to an explosion, leading to a fire, and you don't think it's appropriate to tell Congress?
Mr. Chairman.
Let me ask you this question. But for the reporter at Bloomberg, would you have ever told us?
Of course we would.
Really?
Absolutely.
After, you waited that long? You testified once before Congress and didn't tell us, but once the reporter breaks the story, then you let everyone know?
When the agency was prepared to make a decision as to what the steps were in the protocols and whether we were going to make a decision as to the risk of the Volt, we would have clearly disclosed it. Mr. Chairman, I always want to make one point here. I wake up every morning in this job with one purpose and one purpose only, to make sure that I keep as many people safe and healthy as possible. That's my only goal.
Okay,
That's my only goal for my 600 staff to work with me.
Why'd you wait?
Bottom line being is it has our responsibility for us to be deliberate and careful.
Let me ask you this. Why'd you wait 6 months?
Because
before you started a formal investigation, why'd you wait 6 months?
It took every second of that time for our technicals team and our engineers to figure out
what the
Let me ask you this.
If it's total, then here's the inconsistency I don't get as well. You started the formal investigation 6 months after that picture, 6 months after you'd done some other tests in the interim. And when did you officially say that the Chevy Volt is okay and officially cleared it from any safety concern? When did that happen?
We'll definitely refer you to the timeline, Mr. Chairman, but basically...
Wasn't that just last week?
We concluded the investigation last week. Once we had finished all of our work, actually, we finished our observation of our last Volt vehicle.
So you waited 6 months. Let me just, when I say you waited 6 months, November 25th is when you started the formal investigation, correct?
We opened a formal investigation when the final battery caught on fire and consumed the shed.
So you opened a formal investigation on November 25th.
That's correct.
You officially cleared it, the GM just last week, last Friday, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
That is correct.
Last Friday.
That's correct.
Okay, but on December 6th, Secretary LaHood said the Chevy Volt's safe, there's no problems. So how does that connect? If you didn't start you waited 6 months after you saw pictures like that before you started the formal investigation. You didn't officially clear it till last Friday, but in that, between November 25th when you started and when you cleared it last Friday, the Secretary of Transportation says the Volt's fine.
The Chevrolet Volt was safe to drive, and the Chevrolet Volt had been safe to drive for this entire period. As I said, Mr. Chairman, our responsibility is to figure out whether there was an unreasonable risk of safety and whether there was an imminent risk. That did not exist. We did, however, we're trying to replicate the post-fire crash between 1 to 3 weeks after impact.
Do you see how members of Congress and, frankly, the American public could see some inconsistencies? You don't start a formal investigation 6 months after 6 month time period from when the explosion occurred, and then you don't officially clear it till 2 months later. But in between when you start it, when you officially clear it, the Secretary of Transportation says it's fine.
Mr. Chairman, in our investigatory
and in
process,
the interim, before you start the formal investigation, you know about it. You're developing the CAFE standards, but you can't share the information with Congress, let alone the American public. So at some point, people say, "What is going on?"
Mr. Chairman.
That's why Mr. Kelly had made his opening remarks like he did, because he's like, what is going on?
And we are very happy to explain in great detail exactly every moment that we worked on this investigation. Every investigation, there is preliminary work that takes place. Every time we open a formal investigation, there's preliminary fact-finding that takes place. It was 6 months of preliminary fact-finding for us to be able to get to the point where we felt that we should open a formal investigation. We don't simply take these matters. We have over 40,000 vehicle owner complaints every single year about safety defects, and we investigate the same one.
Let me just ask one. I'm over time, and I want to get to my friend and colleague, Mr. Kucinich. But let me just ask, were you concerned? I mean, here's the bottom line, I think. Were you concerned about if you told us last summer, or excuse me, told us in October about what was going on, that you would impact sales of the Volt and or impact the negotiations on the CAFE standards? That's what we want to know. Were you concerned about that, and is that why you weren't square with us? Is that why you had to wait for a reporter to break the story?
I was square with you. Every day, I talk to victims of traffic crashes, every single day. My first priority is to make sure that we reduce injuries and fatalities due to traffic crashes.
I just want to be clear. I just want
on my mind every
to be
single
clear.
day.
I just want to be clear.
Any other consideration.
I just want to be clear. So your decision not to share information with Congress when you were in front of Congress and you knew the information and we were talking about that subject, your decision not to share that information has nothing to do with your concern about the sales of the Volt and the administration's involvement in this, in promoting the sales of the Volt, or and nothing to do with the negotiation of the CAFE standards at the same time.
Absolutely not. It was pre-decisional. It would be irresponsible of me to disclose anything unless we made an agency decision.
I will yield to the gentleman from Cleveland, Mr. Kucinich.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Strickland, I am going to have a series of questions, and I would ask that your answers be brief and, of course, true.
Yes, Ranking Member.
Now, the fire occurred on June 6th, and as my colleague points out, it wasn't until November that NHTSA's follow-up testing confirmed that this was not an isolated incident. This does seem like a long time. What we need to know, Administrator Strickland, is whether there was a valid reason for so much time to pass, or whether, as the majority has concluded, or has at least offered, that NHTSA was acting in a politically motivated manner. So the first question is, what was NHTSA doing between June and November that required such a long internal investigation?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member. In June, once the fire was discovered after the fact, sometime over the weekend, and we were notified, we had absolutely no notion of what the source of the fire was. There was 3 other vehicles around it. It could have been arson. It could have been one of the other vehicles. It could have been a number of factors. So we had to go out, figure out what happened at the scene, hire additional contracting expertise, fire investigators and folks like that, and then begin the work to actually figure out what happened on the scene. That also included crash testing other Volts to see if we could actually replicate what happened out there.
Was there a second crash test?
Absolutely. There was actually several.
Now, did that second crash test produce an impact into the battery or a fire?
It did not.
And did NHTSA develop a mechanism to damage the battery pack directly in order to test for fire risk?
Yes, sir. That's exactly what we did. We were not satisfied with the fact that we could not recreate the incident at the whole vehicle level. So we took the unprecedented next step to do component level testing, and we had to actually create a whole new system and mechanism in order to recreate that.
So you created the circumstances under which the fire could occur. This wasn't created independently through the vehicle, an intact vehicle, without you having to essentially rig it to go on fire. Is that right?
That is correct, Ranking Member.
And so you intentionally, is it correct that NHTSA intentionally damaged the battery compartment and intentionally ruptured the coolant system to try to reproduce the fire? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Was this fire difficult for NHTSA to reproduce?
Actually, it was.
Why?
Because there are several issues in terms of getting through the substructure of the vehicle in order to get a certain percentage of intrusion into the battery. But not only is that simply intruding into the battery, we had to replicate the exact angle, the exact depth, the exact force of the impact in order to do that. We wanted to take this component level test and make it as close to the real world circumstance that we created in the test as possible. That took a tremendous amount of engineering.
So you went to extensive efforts to try to replicate the fire?
Absolutely.
Is that a normal procedure at NHTSA?
Absolutely not. The reason why we undertook these steps is because we feel that advanced technology vehicles, and especially with anomalous circumstances as what happened in June, we need to know full answers in order to make a decision to protect the American public.
Did GM ever request that NHTSA keep the information from your internal testing and your efforts to replicate a fire? Did GM ever ask you not to disclose that or make it public?
Absolutely not.
Did anyone in the administration, who is your superior, ever ask you to fail to disclose information relating to NHTSA's replication of the fire?
Absolutely not. It is my expectation, it is the Secretary's expectation, it is the Executive Office of the President's expectation that I do my job to lead this agency.
What would you do if someone did come up to you and say, hey, you know what, we've got these issues out here with the technology, we've got issues out here with CAFE standards? What would you do if that did happen?
I have a higher moral obligation to the American public. I would properly disclose any risk if it's proved to be on a reasonable risk of safety, period.
Does NHTSA always keep initial internal investigations confidential prior to opening a formal safety defect investigation?
Like all agencies, we have pre-decisional work to be done.
Why?
Because we handle confidential business information, proprietary information, and frankly, it doesn't serve the American public for us to make a non-deliberative, uncareful decision about something that poses a safety risk.
So what are your statutory obligations with respect to alerting the public to safety risks?
If we find that a defect we believe poses an unreasonable risk to safety, we would initiate a recall process with the manufacturer. We would ask them to undertake a recall.
So hold on a minute. So in your view, before an unreasonable risk to safety is identified, NHTSA does not have a legal obligation to inform the public of isolated hazardous incidents that may occur until it's determined to be an unreasonable risk to safety?
We have no obligation, but clearly before we even make that decision, if we feel that there is an imminent risk, we will always inform the public through consumer advisories and other methodologies.
Let's move from the testing laboratory to the real world. It's my understanding from the Chairman and CEO of GM, who I met with yesterday, there's approximately 8,000 of these vehicles on the road. Are you familiar with those numbers?
That's correct. I think there's around 6,000, volts on the road right now, if I'm not mistaken, plus or minus.
Okay. And have you ever received any reports or accounts of any real-world crashes that would seem to parallel the safety testing that you did internally?
None.
Has anyone that you know ever been hurt in a Chevy Volt vehicle, and those reports came back to you specifically related to a fire risk?
It is my understanding there has been no injuries or fatalities due to post-fire crashes in Volts.
Who on your staff tracks that?
We have an entire office called the Office of Defects Investigation, and that is their responsibility to track all vehicle reports, also early warning reporting data as well through that particular recall office. There is an entire team that does it, and they do a fantastic job. They review over 40,000 complaints every year.
So you follow the crashes, you follow the accidents, you follow incidents, you follow lawsuits, products?
We have lots of information that comes in to help us make defect investigation decisions. All of those things that you listed, Ranking Member, we do look at.
Would you drive a Chevy Volt?
Not only would I drive it, I would drive my mother, my wife, and my baby sister with me along in the ride.
And you would have no concerns about the safety of the vehicle?
None.
And will you continue to maintain a study of the Volt with respect to your internal circumstances that produced the fire?
We treat all vehicle investigations and all vehicles on the road the same way. While we do thorough investigations, it is our obligation to always watch the fleet. So while this investigation may be closed, we will always be looking at not only the Chevrolet Volt, but any other vehicle in terms of possible risks to safety risks to the public.
One final question, Mr. Chairman. You went through great length to describe the circumstances under which you created the fire. Mm-hmm. Could you tell this subcommittee, how likely is it in the real world that those circumstances could actually be replicated as a practical matter?
Well, I'll have to get back to you on the record for the specific technical difficulties in recreating the crash real world, but it is my understanding that it is very, very, very rare. Have you
assessed it mathematically?
I'm not sure if my staff has or has not done that.
Okay. I want to, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a very useful interchange here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member.
Again, I'll make the quick point, though. Certainly it's very rare. We understand that. But the fact is it happened. And it happened at a time when you were negotiating CAFE standards. It happened at a time when you were coming before Congress and you didn't tell us about it. That's the point. So let me just ask this question.
Yes, sir.
When did you first let the public know that there might be a concern that there was, in fact, an explosion that caused a fire with the battery in the vault? What was the first date you let the NHTSA let the public know there might be a concern?
My understanding is we first informed the public in November.
What date?
I have to take a look at my timeline specifically.
Was it before or after the news report from Bloomberg News came out and talked about this issue?
I believe it was concurrently, but bottom line being is
Wait.
our agency actually assisted the reporters in getting that story actually factually correct. So we fully, absolutely worked with those folks to make sure that there was proper details and context of the work that was ongoing and what happened back in June.
So you first released the information to the public after you knew there was going to be a news report about it?
We were in a pre-decisional posture.
The news report took place on November 11th. When did NHTSA officially say something about this concern?
We responded on the 11th, but we were also in a pre-decisional posture. We were close to making those,
When were you going, but for the story, when were you going to tell us?
Fairly soon. We were actually in the process of doing that.
Fairly soon.
Yes.
Okay. But not until, I mean, the way it worked out is not until
Mr. Chairman, it's my
broke the story.
responsibility that I do not disclose to the public anything that we find that we don't have proof that it's on a reasonable risk to safety.
Let me ask you one more question before yielding to Ms. Burkle or Mr. Kelly. Is it customary for the Secretary of Transportation to comment on the safety of a vehicle while there's a formal investigation going on?
The Secretary of Transportation was fully aware of the work that was going on, and they made the statement because it was based on the facts provided to him by this agency.
But that's not what I asked. I said, does he normally do that? In other investigations, does the Secretary of Transportation, while you've got a formal investigation going on, does the Secretary of Transportation make a comment about the safety of the vehicle? Not any comment, but a thumbs-up comment. Is that a normal procedure for the Secretary of Transportation?
The Secretary, my understanding, was asked a direct question, and he gave a direct answer based on facts.
Has it happened before? Is this
Mr. Chairman, you know the Secretary very well. When somebody asks the Secretary of Transportation a question, he answers. That's what he does.
Did Mr. LaHood know at the time he was asked the question and he gave the answer that there was a formal investigation going on?
He was very aware of all the work that was undertaken by the agency at that time.
Our Secretary of Transportation knew you were investigating this vehicle, was asked a question about the safety of the vehicle, comments and says it's fine.
The Secretary knew
and yet that answer was given 6 weeks before you formally said it was fine.
The Secretary knew of all the facts and the details as to whether they're posed an imminent risk.
But don't you think that's a little unusual? At least a little unusual?
No, it wasn't unusual. The Secretaries ask questions like that all the time.
Wait,
he gives an answer. He did it for Toyota.
We got a picture.
He did it for Toyota.
We got a picture of a car explosion that took place. You wait 6 months, start an investigation. 2 weeks into the investigation, the Secretary of Transportation is asked a question about the safety of the vehicle. He says it's great, even though you haven't concluded the investigation. And you think that's normal?
The Secretary was aware of all of our pre-fact-finding work and enough to make a conclusion on his own, supported by the work of the agency, that there was no imminent risk to Volt drivers regarding to this issue. And the Secretary answered directly. He does it all the time.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
I would suggest that what the witness has done with respect to his own experience is to communicate the manner in which the testing occurred, and that in his considered judgment there was no risk to the consumers, and that the Secretary of Transportation, with his understanding that was communicated through his own questioning, determined that what you said was consistent with what he believed to be the facts. Now, the option we always have, and I would suggest it would be very interesting for the subcommittee, would be to invite Secretary LaHood if we have any doubts about his position, which I do not, but the Chair certainly is free to do that.
I appreciate the ranking member's response, and I would just say that I know the ranking member's commitment to safety. Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing track record.
We share that.
Amazing track record in his years of public service. But I would ask you, Mr. Kucinich, don't you think it's a little strange that when there's a formal investigation going on, that the Secretary of Transportation comments and says the vehicle's safe, it's fine, you can drive it?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, you and I share the concern about safety, but it may be that the Secretary, and I don't know unless we invite him, so we can only speculate, it may be he was concluding based on information that he received from NHTSA, and it wasn't an off-the-cuff assessment that was just driven by hope as opposed to material fact.
Okay. Yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strickland, just to be perfectly clear, I do not question why you get up in the morning and what's in your heart. I get up every morning with the same purpose that you do, to serve the American people. Believe me, I was a lot more comfortable in my showroom back in Butler, Pennsylvania than I am sitting here today, and I'm sure you're a lot more comfortable sitting where you sit every day than you are here today. But the question does become, because you know when it comes down to it, it is perception is reality. And we constantly fight these perceptions that are out there. Whether they're real or not, that really has nothing to do with it, because at the end of the day, it's how did the public perceive that? So when we come down to these things, I got to tell you, I've got some slides here, and I have a problem with this, and I've been involved in a lot of vehicle launches. And slide 14 that we have, if we can pull that up. Usually most product launches that I've been to, there are people that show up. And in this one, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, there's Secretary LaHood with EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson. In the middle is President Obama himself. On the right side is Secretary Chu of the Energy. Down in the left-hand corner is Labor Secretary Solis and Henny Stoyer. And then you go to the other side, there's Labor Secretary Hilda Solis. So this is an unusual launch, and the reason I bring that up is because the disconnect between what your agency does, because your mission statement back in 1970 when the agency came into existence was to save lives, prevent injuries, and reduce traffic-related health care and other economic costs. So I look at this and I say, you know what, the stakeholders are all in this launch. This is a halo card, not so much for General Motors, but for this administration. And this has nothing to do with the Chevy Volt or the Nissan Leaf or anything else. For me, it comes down to taxpayer dollars being used to subsidize a product that this administration has decided should go forward. Believe me, if General Motors thought this was a good investment, they would have launched it themselves many, many years ago and would have said, you know what, we can make money with this, because their real commitment is to the shareholders and the stakeholders in the company. Right now, the government's got a big hand in that, do they not? So I think we can agree that there is a mutual benefit here for not only the administration, but General Motors, but on a very, very small scale. Because when you look at the numbers of cars we build every year and we sell every year, this is not going to have a dramatic impact on a carbon footprint or the sales of General Motors products. And I go back to, I sell a lot of Chevy Cruzes. You know how many taxpayer dollars are subsidizing that car? None. You know why? The market loves it. They love it. It's affordable. It's economical. It's safe. It's everything that the American public wants. That's why we're the leaders in the industry. We've always been able to do that. So I come down to these things, and again, I don't question what's in your heart. I would never question your integrity. But when you look at these timelines, and as you go back and forth, every once in a while there may be something you say, well, that was kind of a coincidence. But when it's time after time after time after time, and what did you know, and when did you know it, and when did you share it with General Motors, and when did you share it with the public? And when all these people were weighing in, and certainly they show up for the launch, and I'm sure they stayed for the lunch, but you've got to understand that the American public is demanding from us today more than anything else integrity. Say what you mean what you say. If you're truly protecting our lives, if you're protecting our best interests, if you're looking at all the costs involved, both healthcare and economic, then why so long? Why so long? And I think that's what the chairman keeps referencing. And I think Mr. Kucinich feels the same way. And we all do. We all do. So it's hard for me to sit back and look at this and think that, my gosh, there was a rush to judgment with Toyota. I've got friends that sell Toyotas. And I've watched this Congress bring members of the former GM board in and excoriate them for bad business practices. Now, keep in mind, this is an outfit that's running at $15 trillion in the red. And they're telling General Motors, you guys don't know how to run your business. Say, okay, well, thanks. I think if I'm going to hire somebody, I probably won't go to you guys. But We bring Toyota in. We embarrass them in front of the world. We roll this out very early. When did we go to Toyota and say, listen, you know what, we've run these tests. Now, it took us 6 months to let the public know there's an acceleration problem. We didn't do that, did we? I mean, there was a real timeline problem here. When you compare the two, and I'm not talking about General Motors and Toyota. I'm talking about electric vehicles, whether it's a Chevrolet Volt or the Nissan Leaf or anything else that's out there. If these cars are so great and so marketable, why do we have to subsidize them so heavily? In my state of Pennsylvania, in addition to $7,500 tax credit from the federal government, Pennsylvania throws another $3,500 at this car. That's $11,000. I've sold a lot of cars in my lifetime. And the only time you put a spiff on a car is when it won't move on its own. Why are we using taxpayer dollars to do this? And certainly, if the corporate average fuel economy doesn't have anything to do with this, I go back to, I don't know how old you are, but I go back to the days they actually launched this. It was about dependence on foreign oil. It had nothing to do with carbon footprint. Didn't have to get the DOD involved in this to come up with the idea that, you know what, if you build a car that gets better gas mileage, the people that actually pay for these cars and buy them and have to put fuel in them will probably go to a vehicle that in the long run is cheaper to run. General Motors done it all our lives. We've done it since day one. That's why we've always led the world. But I got to tell you, when you look at this, I really am concerned, and I mean this sincerely. Your agency dropped the ball on this, sir. And when I look at the dialogue back and forth and about when this stuff came to light, there is a timeline that needed to be addressed. And go back to your own mission statement, save lives, prevent injuries, and reduce traffic-related health care and other economic costs. I think there's also another investment here. And that's the one that took precedence over what your initial mission statement is. So I don't know that you can answer any of those questions. I don't know if it's so much a question as a statement.
With the gentleman,
because we're both members of the same organization. We're trying to do the best thing for the people that we represent.
would my friend yield?
Yes, sir.
You may have been out of the room when I made this statement. I just want to make sure that the record's clear. I did make the observation that it seemed like a long time, but what I tried to do in the course of the questioning is to give Mr. Strickland the opportunity to testify whether there was a valid reason for so much time to pass. And I think that, in my view, he did, effectively make a case why it took so long. But I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, and will the gentleman yield?
Sure, of course.
Were the same standards used when we had the acceleration problems with Toyota?
I think it would be good to ask Mr. Strickland that question.
Every investigation is different. Every investigation has different facts, and every investigation has different needs in terms of our pre-fact-finding work at the technical level. Mr. Kelly, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate your statement that you're absolutely right. The American people sends folks like me their faith to make sure that the decisions that this agency makes are the right ones. And our process is one that we have to prove an unreasonable risk to safety before we could take any formal action against an automaker for them to remedy that particular problem.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Gentleman for a second. So I just want to be clear, Mr. Strickland, your testimony is each investigation is different and unique. Is that correct?
They are, yes.
So you're saying that with the Volt, the General Motors vehicle, you took a different tact, different approach than you did with the Toyota vehicle.
Jordan, I meant that technically. Every investigation at the technical level.
No, let's be clear.
I was trying to clarify.
When you testified just a few seconds ago, you said each investigation is unique. So it's truthful, it's factual that you did a different type of approach with the Volt and General Motors than you did with Toyota.
We take different technical approaches because there are different problems. We took the same process. The process between Toyota and GM was the same.
The taxpayer-subsidized auto manufacturer got a different approach than the non-taxpayer-funded auto manufacturer. That's what you said.
No, Mr. Jordan, I said at the technical level, every investigation is different. Different technologies, different problems, different issues, different levels of how much we know about a particular technology pipeline. But we treat, and I want to underscore this, we treat every manufacturer the same. We hold them accountable for the Safety Act every single day.
There is no way that statement can jive with what you just said 2 minutes ago. You said each investigation is unique and different, and now you're saying we treat each manufacturer the same. Did you wait 6 months before you told the public on concerns with other manufacturers? I don't think so. So that's the concern the American taxpayer has. You've just stated it right here in the last 2 minutes. That's the concern the American taxpayer has.
The American taxpayer, Mr. Jordan, expects us to do the right job every single time in finding safety defects. And they want to make sure that when we make a decision that an unreasonable risk to safety exists, that we act proactively. It does not serve the American people with the number of complaints that we get every single year. Mr. Jordan, what you've basically outlined in this situation would mean that this agency would have to outline 40,000
I'm not outlining anything
every single year if we're going to treat everything the same.
I'm not outlining anything. You answered Mr. Kelly's and Mr. Kucinich's questioning by saying each investigation is unique and different. And all I'm doing is saying, so GM got treated different than Toyota did.
Mr. Jordan, I'm
not manufacturing anything.
In terms of process, we treat every manufacturer the same. At the technical level, we have to take every investigation with the same set of facts. And there's different technical issues, and we treat those uniquely because different cars have different problems.
Gentleman from Cleveland is recognized.
I just want to make sure to follow up on what the Chairman said. Did you pull any punches with GM because they're taxpayer subsidized, or did you go into the science to try to see if there was any way you could replicate a fire?
We pull no punches. We treat this investigation the way we treat every investigation. If we have a question...
So GM's not going to get a pass because there's...
No, absolutely not. The core of what we do every day is driven by data, science, and engineering.
And the data and the science was different because you were studying in Toyota something different in terms of acceleration as opposed to with the Volt you were trying to replicate to see whether or not there was a fire that could be created under laboratory circumstances.
That is correct, Ranking Member.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Well, I would just point out, too, when the investigation of Toyota took place, we weren't negotiating the CAFE standards. We weren't, we didn't have administration officials going out to Toyota plants, taking pictures in the cars, talking about the need to do certain things and have certain kind of vehicles sold. We didn't have this huge investment in green technology. There's all, so again, I come back to what the administrator said. That's the point here. He's under oath. He's testifying. He said that they are different and unique investigations each time. And I just asked a simple question, was GM treated different than Toyota? And based on what this administrator said, that in fact was the case.
My friend, he spoke to the relevant underlying technical facts of what they had to look at. There's different problems. That's how I took it. Is that what you meant?
That is what I meant, Ranking Member.
Yield to the, I'm sorry, I took Mr. Kelly's time. Mr. Kelly, you have a few minutes left. And
thank you.
We'll
and Mr. Strickland?
Actually,
Mr. Strickland, let me just say something to you, okay?
Absolutely.
There is a difference between the two of us. You were actually appointed and I was elected. And
that is true.
We'll give you plenty.
But, and Mr. Ackerson is going to be here pretty soon, you're getting a little bit of a flavor as when I go back home and we have town hall meetings, what it's like. So as much as it may seem like it's an easy thing, that we can actually walk and chew gum at the same time, so I'm going to tell you, people ask you questions that are really trying to get to the heart of the problem. And I do want to, again, this doesn't attack you personally. Mm-hmm. This is not about anybody's personality. This is about performance. And this is a standard that we have to be held to, both you and I, for the American public. So as we go forward in this, I just hope that we're understanding this. And I'm going to show you something, just so you know. Because, you know, most cars are 12-volt operation. You know, this is 300-volt.
Yes.
It also has a 12-volt. Now, do you know, I have techs that have been trained to this because the concern was always about safety. Do you know what our guys do? You know some of the essential tools? One of the things, I bought some gloves today, okay? First thing you got to put on is this cloth glove when you're going to disconnect or unhook the battery, okay? Then the next thing you got to do is this keeps the moisture down, which we know you don't want to have your hands wet when you're working around electricity, especially 300 volts. And you got to put on the rubber glove. And then on top of that, you got to put on the leather glove. So this is a three-pronged process. And this is all designed to protect the technicians that are working on this car. And I don't know that you know this. I don't know if you've seen this procedure before. There was one other essential tool that was debated early on. Do you know what it was?
No, sir.
It was an insulated shepherd's hook. Now, that's the same hook that the Lord refers to a lot about the good shepherd pulling one of his flock back out of a problem that was in. So if you're a technician and you're working on a volt and you happen to hit a live wire, 300 volts, which does have a little bit of effect on your ability to sustain life, you grab the insulated shepherd's hook and you pull your comrade off the car. So I want to make sure that we understand where we're going with this. And the responsibility that you have to the American public and the responsibility that we all have to the American public for the same thing, to protect them from health care costs or economic costs that related from an injury. So we're going to take off the gloves. And I don't dislike you. I admire you for what you're doing. I want you to travel with me sometime back in the district and meet some of the folks that I represent. But
I would love to.
As we go forward, there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to continue to look at this. But as Mr. Jordan said, perception is reality. We have created now a question of trust, not only here in this body, but also with your agency, because now the American people have to start to wonder, so why did they do it? What happened? When did it happen? When did they let General Motors know about it? And was it in the best interest of the public?
Would my
or was
friend
it in the
yield
best
for 10
interest
seconds?
of the administration?
Would my friend yield for 10 seconds?
I will, Mr. Kucinich.
I will say that we're fortunate to have you on this committee because your expertise in automotive is wonderful to have you here. But I would also submit that the question isn't whether GM was dealing with the kind of gloves you're talking about, but whether or not NHTSA treated GM with kid gloves.
And I will tell you this, it's a matter, Mr. Kucinich, of protecting people from harm. And in this case, I think we're protecting the administration more than we are the American public.
Well, you and I agree on the safety issue.
Okay. And we both like each other. I know that's a hard thing for most people to understand, and we don't fight down here all the time.
The ranking member of the full committee has been extremely patient. I want to give him as much time as the gentleman. You want 10 minutes? Does that work?
I probably won't need that much, but thank you very much.
Maryland's recognized.
Thank you very much. First of all, Mr. Strickland, Administrator Strickland, thank you very much for your testimony this morning. When I listened to your testimony, and I listened to yesterday comments from the GM head, Mr. Ackerson, and I combine what I've heard this morning with what he had to say, I have some simple words for you, and it is that I believe you.
Thank you, sir.
A lot of times when we look at circumstances from this vantage point, we make judgment calls, but we're not in your shoes. And as a trial lawyer for many years, I often saw facts that appeared to say one thing, but when the story was told and the circumstances were explained, they said a whole other thing. I think part of the problem here this morning is that, as I've listened very carefully, the timeline and getting out information at certain points seems a bit shaky. And as I listened to your explanation in response to one of Mr. Kucinich's questions, I am convinced that apparently you did things in a way that it should have been done. But the problem is this. Somebody over there just said trust is so important. And there is a book that I recommend to all my proteges. It's called The Speed of Trust. And it talks about how important it is that when, in any relationship, that you trust a person because it allows the relationship to move faster. In other words, get things done. But there are two kinds of trust. There's trust with regard to integrity, and then there's trust with regard to competence. In other words, I would not want my barber cutting my hair. So I think, and I don't want us to get confused here. You've been sworn here today. But what has happened here, and whether you know it or not, is your integrity has been questioned. Your honesty has been questioned. And then the question becomes, what is that all about? Now, I don't believe this hearing is about safety. I wish I did. I think that GM has come up with a brilliant idea. They've come up with a great product. It's had some problems. But there is this allegation out there that some kind of way President Obama or somebody from the Obama administration came to NHTSA and said, don't put out certain information because we want GM to be successful. Or they have conflated the CAFE standards with all of this, which is ridiculous. So I'm going to ask you a few questions that I want you to clear up some things. Because, see, what happens here is that, Mr. Strickland, our lives are short. And damage can be done to somebody sitting in that chair, and they don't even know it's been done. Or your wife will be looking at you on television tonight and saying, you know, they really made you look bad. Well, I just want you to know, calm down. You don't look bad.
Thank you, sir.
But I got to ask you this. You know, there's been some discussion with regard to, you know, when you were here before, and there was discussion that you had at the October fuel economy standards hearing regarding safety focused on, and that focused on the impact of weight and mass reduction. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
And I want to ask you this. Do electric vehicle technologies have impact on weight and mass reduction of vehicles?
No.
So the discussion on safety at the October hearing was not directly relevant to the battery fires that occurred 3 weeks after a series of extreme tests. Is that right?
That is correct, sir.
So the majority is attempting to conflate two separate issues. Mr. Strickland, how does the safety of electric vehicles compare to conventional fuel-based vehicles?
There is no differential in risk between those two systems. They have different attributes that have to be taken into account, but there's no different risk between electric vehicles and gasoline-powered vehicles.
Does the fire of a Chevy Volt, weeks following extreme crash testing in the NHTSA lab, justify Chairman Iss's characterization of Chevy's Volt as a, quote, fiery failure?
No, absolutely not. It was an anomalous result that we were not expecting, and GM wasn't expecting either, and we took a lot of time to figure out the root cause, which we did, and we feel that the remedy that GM has proposed would deal with those issues going forward.
And so we've got a situation. I want you to understand how this stuff works, okay, because I've been around here a while, 16 years. There are some employees that are going to watch this at GM tonight, if they're not watching it right now. And they care about this vehicle. They are people who, if it were not for the good leadership of Mr. Ackerman and the help that they got from the government, would be out of a job. They take pride in this vehicle. And so we're having this discussion today, and I don't want the word going out. See, you can have collateral damage in these hearings. And the collateral damage could be that folk go out and say, I'm not going to buy a Volt. They catch a little bit of information, right? Not going to buy a Volt. So therefore, a car that is safe now, and it is safe, is that right?
Absolutely.
You all just released a report, what, Friday?
We closed our investigation last week. That's correct.
So I want it to be clear that they can buy a Volt, and as you said, you didn't say these words, but you be comfortable with your wife, your children, lottie-dottie, and everybody riding in it. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Because, see, you know, we run around here and we complain about jobs. And here we complain about what we're failing to do, but here we have used some of the best minds to create one of the best vehicles, one that's selling off the charts. We've got GM now leading the world. And this hearing in and of itself could cause damage to all of that. So I don't want to, believe me, I want to make sure that the vehicle is safe. That's why I want you to be clear that safety should be all of our #1 concern. And I know it's yours, but I also want the word to go out. I don't want this collateral damage, because that collateral damage is going to cost somebody, a supplier in my district perhaps, or a supplier in Mr. Jordan's district, to perhaps have to close their doors. But more importantly, it sends a message to hardworking Americans who are producing a great product, and a product that will allow GM to perhaps continue to lead the world with regard to sales of vehicles. And so I just, I want you to just go back, just 1 second, I've got 1 minute left, and give us, and I don't want these, see what they're going to do? I've been around here a long time. They're going to keep hammering at you. I'm just telling you, that's what they're going to do. I can go to lunch and come back, they're going to still be beating up on you, because they want to make a point. And you know what? Sometimes the point ain't even there. It's not there. They're swatting, we got a point, I want to make a point. And I want you to use my 23 seconds is left, to assure us that although it may have appeared, the timeline may have appeared not to be all that we would want it to be, that it was. Can you explain that to us again?
Mr. Cummings, thank you so much for the opportunity. Our work was independent. We have a statutory obligation to protect the American public from unreasonable risk to safety caused by vehicle defects. Our obligation is to make sure the American public gets home safely every time. It took us 6 months in order to figure out not only whether the Volt was involved, what specifically caused the fire, and whether there was an imminent risk, and then if there was a defect that needed to be addressed. It took 6 months of a lot of engineers, not only in my agency, but in other agencies across government, to do that. At no time was there any notion of any other part of government coming to me or coming to any of my staff saying that we should do nothing other than our job. And that's what we did.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you. I would just point out we're not trying to make a point. The point is the point. The timeline is the timeline. The facts are the facts. And that's exactly what this hearing is about. The hearing is not the problem. The problem is the problem. That's why we have the hearing.
The problem is the problem.
Yeah, we're here because a vehicle exploded and a timeline, and this gentleman did not give information to the committee when he could have back in October.
That is right, but would the gentleman yield for just a second?
All I'm saying is the facts are the facts.
The facts are the facts.
You're saying we're swatting at things, we're appearing, we're trying, we keep him here to we got our last questioner right now.
Yeah, well,
that's not what this hearing is about, and that's not the points we're
Come on, Mr. Chairman. Come on now. I've been around a long time. This hearing is not about safety. This hearing is about an attack.
No, it's not.
Okay,
it's about getting to the facts.
All right, fine.
Little lady from New York is recognized, the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unlike the ranking member, Mr. Cummins, I'm new here in Washington. So and Mr. Strickland, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Nice seeing you again.
Nice to see you too. We've had other conversations about other issues, but today I'd like to talk about, and the ranking member brought it up, trust based on integrity or based on competence. I'm concerned with your role and NHTSA's role with regards to competence and making sure that the technicians and the folks who work there know exactly what the issues are, what to do. And in this instance, it really is the issue of the lithium-ion battery. That really is, and how one handles that and how one treats that. That really is kind of the essence of what we're talking about here for safety. And I think we should all take this opportunity. We learn from mistakes. We learn from shortcomings. We look at situations that we didn't like the way they worked out, and we figure out what we did wrong, and we move on. And so I think that's what a hearing like this is about. How do we prevent this from happening again? I guess my question to you is were the safety engineers aware of the dangers posed by the damaged lithium-ion battery?
At what point, Madam Chair?
After the crash occurred on the 12th, May 12th, then the car sat after the crash.
Okay, I understand. Thank you, Vice Chairman, for clarifying that. The car was put through a normal new car assessor program side impact test. When we finish with those particular tests and get the results, the car, the hull, is then sold for salvage. That car was stored in the normal process in the yard, thinking that there was going to be no issues, and it wasn't observed at all until those 3 weeks later on June 6th, when the staff at MGA came back and noticed that of the burnt holes that were discovered. So no one had an expectation that the particular fire incident that happened in June 6th would be precipitated from the May 12th test.
And I guess that gets to the essence of my question. These batteries, when it was traumatized, when you had the crash test on May the 12th, it then began to leak, and there was evidence that there was a leaking orange fluid. And my concern is that the safety administrators didn't have the wherewithal or the knowledge that this leaking battery would cause a problem, given that battery and the energy behind it and the dangers. And so my question to you is, why was that car stored with other cars? Why wasn't that battery drained? Why wasn't that handled? Why wasn't it handled as if someone understood the dangers with regards to this lithium-ion battery?
Our engineers and the test facility engineers actually know of the dangers and the issues regarding lithium-ion in terms of how much energy they store. In all of the crash tests up until that particular point, the ones that are taken by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and my understanding of those undertaken by GM, there has never been an issue where post-crash there was actually a fire issue. So therefore, there was no protocol, either by National Highway Traffic Safety Administration or GM externally at that particular time to deal with batteries post-crash. Because this is a new technology and we are always learning, this is something that, frankly, that we addressed and we looked at and we took the proper processes once we recognized that this could be an issue.
And that, sir, with all due respect, is our concern, or my concern. The fact that if it was a regular engine, you would have drained, after an accident, you would have drained the gasoline out of the tank to avoid any. And in this instance, the fact that the fire did occur because the fluid wasn't drained, there were no protocols, therefore there were no protocols given to GM. And that's a problem, because in this instance, without the protocols, without giving the protocols to GM, how do you inform them of what happened? And I mean, that's the purpose of you do. And obviously this could happen if it happened down the road and you have a similar situation. So that's the concern. There were no protocols, GM wasn't informed, and it appears, and we talk about appearance being reality, that the administrators, the safety administrators, didn't have the knowledge of this battery and the danger that this leaking fluid out of it could cause and did cause this fire. So I believe I'm out of time, and I yield back my time. Thank you.
Actually, I'd like to respond to that.
Quickly, that'd be great.
I'll be very brief. Am I satisfied for the fact of what we as an agency or what the manufacturers do at the time in terms of post-crash protocols for lithium-ion batteries? No. That's the reason why we addressed it. But there was also no reason to think that there was an issue with the protocols because of the processes that we went through and our learning over the years about these systems. In battery intrusion, we've always known is a situation that we want to avoid. In this particular situation, in an anomalous way, the battery was intruded upon, and then we discovered a list of events where we know we needed to address lithium-ion batteries post-crash, which is what we did with the National Fire Protection Association and the Department of Energy. So, Madam Chairwoman, Vice Chairwoman, we absolutely want to make sure that we protect those people, not in post-crash, the second responders, the storage facilities, all those other things. But let me be perfectly clear. We have been working on lithium-ion and high-voltage battery systems for several years. We began our work on safety protocols and a research plan in 2010 specifically, well before any of these issues came to the fore, because we recognize that there's always going to be learning going forward in how we deal with these safety systems. It's a priority, and we take our job very seriously in that.
Thank you, Administrator. We want to get to the Chairman of the full committee, and we promise this will be your last 5 minutes, and then because we do want to get to Mr. Ackerson Wilson before we have votes. So the Chairman of the Committee, Mr. Issa, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and perhaps going last gives me one advantage. Administrator Strickland, this is about safety. This is about government's role. This committee, under Republicans and Democratic leaders, has taken on auto companies and the Transportation Safety Administration overall. We did it under Toyota, and we did it in a very, very bipartisan fashion. So understand, you're here today because my first hybrid electric car came with me to Washington. The factory that blew up and left the world without enough lithium-ion batteries occurred while I was still a CEO in the electronics industry. How dare you tell us you're still developing protocols while the President is sitting in an electric car, and it's not General Motors' first electric car. It's not the first electric car that has been put on the road. So one of the reasons you're here today is you're behind the power curve. This vehicle's picture was not released until today. I've got to tell you, if you were against electric cars, if you were not trying to promote them, perhaps ahead of some of the expertise you have for safety, this picture would have been splashed 20 minutes after it burned. The fact is, your administration is not up to speed to maintain safety in an electric age. Now, I grew up, like many people on both sides of the dais, seeing exposés of various trucks and cars, and I won't name the brands, exploding on television. It's not new that you can have catastrophic events in the case of an accident. It's one of the reasons you have the test protocol. I'm deeply concerned today about one major part of this, the most important part. You didn't know what you were doing. An anomaly happened. It happened when there were less than 400,000 volts out there, didn't it? Didn't it?
I don't know the state of charge.
Well, I would do. By July, there were less than 4,000. We'll have the CEO here in a moment. Today, there are twice as many out there. You didn't even inform and deal with the problem either to the public or to General Motors or to this committee when people were here in front of this committee during the intervening period until Bloomberg Media outed you. Now, how do you answer the question of transparency, accountability, and trust today? You said you'd put your mother, your grandmother, all these people in a car you don't own. You put the President of the United States in the car. You put the Secretary of Transportation in the car. How dare you not have both the public and this committee know what you knew in a timely fashion? How do you answer that accusation, which is the safety charge that you guys screwed up on by keeping a secret?
Mr. Chairman, I will point to the timeline, which is very detailed as to the work that was undertaken by the agency, along with the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense.
The car blew up 3 weeks after it was hit unexplained, right? Part of the timeline.
That's correct.
3 minutes after that 3-week event, why was it that executives at General Motors weren't flying in well informed? Why is it that one of the hallmark projects of this administration that higher-ups, including Secretary LaHood, including, if necessary, a briefing sent to someone that would try to get it to the President, why wasn't that as important?
GM was notified as soon as we were notified on June the 6th. And it is our responsibility to figure out what is wrong with the vehicle, even if the vehicle was at cause. At the point that we saw, Mr. Chairman, we didn't even know whether the volt was at fault. So we had to build from the ground up which vehicle was responsible, or if it was a vehicle, it could have been an arsonist as far as we knew. Then once we isolated to the volt, it took every moment up until we were able to close the investigation to do the engineering work for us to come to the decision on whether or not the volt posed an unreasonable risk to safety. And until we have that agency decision made, it is irresponsible, frankly illegal, for us to go forward and tell the American public that there is something wrong with the car when we don't know what it is or not. It took us that time to figure it out. So there was never any notion of us not being transparent, Mr. Chairman. We were doing our jobs.
Well, I hear you. I don't believe you. The fact is, today, coming to this hearing, why weren't these pictures released? Oh, I'm sorry, that's an embarrassment. But what part of transparency gives you an obligation to be forward-looking? It's great that everyone's still promoting the Volt. I go to every CES show and every other show, and I see all kinds of special cup holder battery chargers in the Volt. I see all kinds of nice things. The fact is, the American public wasn't interested in buying the car in large quantity even with incentives. Now we have a safety question, and it's not a safety question about the volt. It's about trust of your agency. Can we trust you in this and every other area to not be selective and basically overly cautious? This was a new automobile. Something catastrophic happened, and you're telling me it took months to get to where you had a confidence level that, quote, you had a problem? It sounds to me like you had to make sure that you could absolutely explain this as an anomaly to save the whole reputation of the Volt and electric cars, and you started off saying, we've got to prove that this is safe, and we're not going to stop until we fully proved it and documented it. You certainly had concerns. Now, I'm going to share one thing in closing. Look, I was an automobile parts manufacturer. I had a recall. I've been down the road of an anomaly that, along with Circuit City, one of my major customers at the time. I was, and you can always say that because they're no longer around to complain one way or the other. The fact is, we were under the scrutiny from a national level from the moment the agency was informed. Under the scrutiny. Ultimately, we did a recall on something where there was no problem in the vehicle, but we explained in depth how somebody could make a mistake in installation on a limited number of cars. I'm very familiar with how fast you can act, even if you don't know all the facts, but you know something bad happened. Now, with the Chairman's indulgence, please, you've got the last word.
Mr. Chairman, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is not in the reputation business. We're in the safety business. I am not concerned about the reputation of any manufacturer if they put a product out there that poses an unreasonable risk to safety. We work independently to prove that every single day. Now, I appreciate your comparison with your experience with Circuit City and your company, but we have a statutory obligation under the Safety Act that we have to fulfill before we move forward in pressing a manufacturer for a mandatory recall. It would be improper for us to do anything different than that process. So it is a very careful and deliberate process. I wish it could be instantaneous. It takes technical work, engineering work, and a lot of science to be able to figure that out to a point of certainty. And those 6 months, it took every second for my engineers at NHTSA to be able to come to that conclusion and give us the information for an agency decision and a recommendation of the Secretary of Transportation. So we are as transparent an agency as we find in government. We have a database which is filled with tens of thousands of complaints every single year of vehicle defects. We work very hard. We've reduced fatalities in America because of traffic crashes by 25% since 2006. We take every single crash that injures or kills someone with the highest level of sincerity and severity. And, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to explain that.
Mr. Chairman, working with your subcommittee, I would ask that we continue the process of verifying what has just been said, essentially how often it takes 6 months when there's a known catastrophic event. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Also, thank you. Administrator, we want to thank you for your time. We do want to get to our next witness as quick as we can. If the staff would quickly get ready for panel 2, we want to get Mr. Ackerson started because we're going to have votes sometime in the next half an hour, and we want the testimony and time for questioning of our second witness. Thank you, Administrator. Well, we're pleased to have Mr. Dan Ackerson, the CEO of General Motors, with us. And, Mr. Ackerson, you know the routine here. We've got to do the swearing in real quick, and then you get your 5 minutes, and we'll go from there. So if you raise your right hand, you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Let the record show the witness answered in the affirmative. And, again, Mr. Ackerson, I know you were here for the first panel. So you get 5 minutes, and we're pretty lenient with that time, as you saw. So go right ahead, and then we'll get to questioning and hopefully get this done before we have to go to vote.
Turn on the mic, turn on the mic, turn on the mic.
I did the same thing. Try the mic there if you would there. And then just pull it close. Should have a red light there.
Got it.
There you go.
Good morning. Thank you. Chairman Jordan, Ranking Members Cummings and Kucinich. I welcome the opportunity to testify today and stand behind a car that all of us at General Motors are proud of. Please allow me to start with some Volt history. GM unveiled the Volt concept at the January 2007 Detroit Auto Show. In June of 2008, the old GM's Board of Directors approved the Volt project for production, well before the bankruptcy and the infusion of government funds. The battery story goes back much farther in the early 1990s with GM's extensive work on the EV1. Drawing on that experience, we engineered the Volt to be a winner on the road and in customers' hearts. Today I'm proud to say that the Volt is performing exactly as we engineered it. In its first year, the Volt garnered the Triple Crown of industry awards: Motor Trend Car of the Year, Automobiles Magazine Automobile of the Year, and the North American Car of the Year. Volt is among the safest cars on the road, earning 5 stars for occupant safety and a top safety pick with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And 93% of Volt owners report the highest customer satisfaction with their car, more than any other vehicle and the highest ever recorded in the industry. Beyond the accolades, the Volt's importance to GM and our country's long-term prospects is far-reaching. We engineered the Volt to be the only EV that you can drive across town or across the country without fear of being stranded when the battery is drained. You can go 35 miles, in some cases much more, on a single charge, which is for 80% of American drivers is their total driving range. After that, a small gas engine extends your range to 375 miles, roughly, before you have to recharge or refill. But if the Volt message boards are any indications, there's some real one-upsmanship going on out there. Customers were reporting going months and thousands of miles without stopping once at a gas pump. No other EV can do this or generate that much passion with its drivers. We engineered the Volt to give drivers a choice to use energy produced in the United States rather than from oil from places that may not always put America's best interest first. We engineered the Volt to show the world what great vehicles we make at General Motors. Unfortunately, there's one thing we did not engineer. Although we loaded the Volt with state-of-the-art safety features, we did not engineer the Volt to be a political punching bag. And sadly, that is what it's become. For all the loose talk about fires, we are here today because tests by regulators resulted in a battery fire under lab conditions that no driver would experience in the real world. In fact, Volt customers have driven over 25 million miles without a similar incident. In one test, the fire occurred 7 days after a simulated crash. In another, it took 3 weeks after the test. Not 3 minutes, not 3 hours, not 3 days, 3 weeks. Based on those test results, did we think there was an imminent safety risk? No. Or as one customer put it, if they couldn't cut him out of a vehicle in 2 or 3 weeks, he had a bigger problem to worry about. However, given those test results, GM had a choice in how it would react. It was an easy call. We put our customers first. We moved fast and with great transparency to engineer a solution. We contacted every Volt owner and offered them a loaner car until the issue was settled. And if that wasn't enough, we offered to buy the car back. We assembled a team of engineers who worked nonstop to develop a modest enhancement to the battery system to address the issue. We'll begin adding that enhancement on the production line and in customer cars. in a few weeks. And in doing so, we took a 5-star rated vehicle and made it even safer. Nonetheless, these events have cast an undeserved, damaging light on a promising new technology that we're exporting around the world, right from Detroit. As the Wall Street Journal wrote in its Volt Review, we should suspend our rancor and savor a little American pride. A bunch of Midwestern engineers in bad haircuts and cheap wristwatches just out-engineered every other car company on the planet. The Volt is safe. It's a marvelous machine. It represents so much about what's right about General Motors and, frankly, about American ingenuity in manufacturing. I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ackerson. We appreciate you being with us today, and we appreciate the fact that in your testimony you talked about you contacted every Volt owner, and frankly the response you took when this was brought to the public's attention. In your opinion, Mr. Ackerson, should NHTSA have known to drain the battery when they conducted this test and they subjected it to a crash? They took it out on this lot and they left it set there. Shouldn't they have known that they needed to drain the battery?
I can only speak for General Motors and the protocols within the industry. The protocol on whether it's a combustion engine or an electric assist, as the Volt is to disconnect the battery, the 12-volt battery in a combustion engine car, and drain the gas. Our protocol at the time, with the understanding in the background that this is a new and evolving technology, was the battery, the 12-volt battery is disconnected, and the large 16-kilowatt-hour battery was disconnected, not depowered. Lesson learned, and that's part of our protocols going forward.
But let me be clear. So is it fairly common knowledge that when there's a crash, you drain the battery, drain the gas tank? I mean, is that common sense?
You disconnect a 12-volt battery, disconnect it from the circuitry, and you drain the gas tank.
Okay. So, but should we have expected NHTSA to know that they should have drained the battery? Or is that an unfair expectation?
Again, I can't speak for the administration.
Any testing that you had done before, any testing that you know of other manufacturers with similar type electric vehicles, do they know they're supposed to, I mean, did they drain their batteries in those tests? I mean, it seems to me this is something NHTSA should have known to do, rather than just park it on the lot with a bunch of other cars.
Let me speak to what General Motors knew. We had 285,000 hours of testing on this battery, which is the equivalent of 25 car lives, if you will. Mm-hmm. And everything we found was this was a safe.
Did any of that testing involve draining the battery after it had been subjected to a crash or after the battery had been punctured?
No.
Okay. When did NHTSA ask you for the protocols? When did you give them the protocols that did include draining the battery?
In the case in question where the car had a fire 3 weeks after the crash, it was left, as you saw, on the side of the road. And I don't know that the battery was even disconnected. I believe it was. I'm talking about the 12-volt battery. Mm-hmm. I believe it was, and I believe the larger battery was disconnected from the circuitry, but not drained.
Okay. Okay. And when did you plan on, if at all, informing the owners of the Volt and the public about potential concerns? Did you plan on doing that, or is that something you were waiting? You worked in conjunction with NHTSA. What was your plans at General Motors for informing the public?
Well, after listening to the administrator's testimony, as the summer progressed, we had to disassemble the battery itself and look for the root cause. And as he said, there were concerns about arson or one of the other 3 or 4 cars involved. It wasn't all that clear to anyone exactly what happened. It happened over a weekend. There was no observation. Mm-hmm. There was no witness to what happened. In September of last year, we tested and NHTSA tested again, and we could not replicate a fire.
Okay.
We did the same exact test, we General Motors. They did exactly the same test. We could not replicate. And so there were further tests. And as he said, the battery itself was extracted from the vehicle. It was pierced with a steel rod, which is highly unlikely in the real world. And then it was rotated, simulating a rollover, not in a second that you would expect in the road, but by an hour, and it was drenched, if you will, in fluid, coolant. It took 7 days for a fire to occur. I'd like to underscore, there was no explosion, a fire. And that, at that point, after that extreme, what I would call not real-world situation, 7 days, that's when they said they wanted to open a formal investigation. We notified our customers immediately after that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. We yield now to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Eckerson, for being here. Is the vault safe?
It is very safe.
Have you ever had any communication with anybody in the Obama administration to ask them to provide some kind of consideration to GM with respect to the testing that you became aware of, not to disclose it or to defer disclosure of it?
Absolutely not.
And you're sure that in terms of your line staff, it didn't happen?
I'm quite sure. I can't testify to that to 100%.
But you,
I don't think
as a policy, GM did not try to get the Obama administration to fail to disclose any tests that were made in a laboratory setting.
No, no one.
And you're not aware of any accident or any injury that's occurred to anyone driving a Volt?
Absolutely none.
They're safe in the vehicle, is that right?
I own one, yes.
And you drive it, and your family members drive it as well?
I just bought it.
Okay. Well, let me ask you something. If there was a material defect in a car that was out in circulation right now, would that affect, let's say, your insurance that GM would be buying from your insurance carrier? Wouldn't they increase the cost of your insurance if you were likely to have, let's say, a claim for a product liability? Wouldn't that be a problem for you?
Yes.
Has that occurred? Has your insurance company contacted you and said, wait a minute, Mr. Eckerson, there's questions here, and it's going to cost you more it's going to cost GM more to have insurance. Has that happened?
I insured this car, and it was ridiculously low, but that's because it's a 5-star rated car by the Insurance Institute.
So the very people who are charged with determining risk as a question of the market now, they have not increased the cost of insurance. To the contrary, they've given it a high rating.
I presume that's the...
Is that the way it works?
Yeah, that's the way we're under the fire running an insurance company.
Can you discuss what effect designing and producing the Volt has had on GM? Has it helped GM become more competitive?
As I said, this is an evolving area of automotive engineering and technology. It's a halo car in the sense that we get a cachet, if you will, of being innovative, and successful companies all innovate. Just to set an expectation, a little bit of background, we sold more Volts in the first year than Toyota sold Priuses in the first year that they rolled out the Prius. So new technologies do take a while to take hold, to get traction. And I think that the engineering around this has been viewed as, it was described as a moonshot from a technological point of view, and indeed I think it was. And I think that has benefited other cars. We're rolling out.
So it's your experience then that the manufacturing of the Volt will put America essentially on the map with respect to these electric vehicles. Is that right?
These electric vehicles, the derivatives are already going into many of our cars. And, for example, the Buick LaCrosse, which got in the high 20s on the road mileage, with e-assist, as we call it, it jumps to 37 to 38 miles per gallon. So we're getting derivative positive impacts of exploring these technologies and deploying them in the real world, yes.
And so the manufacturing of the Volt, then, moves America towards clean and efficient energy technologies that's not only used in the Volt, but is being used in other cars to help them become more fuel efficient. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that, in turn, I might add, has a lot to do with saving jobs in this economy. How many jobs has GM added to the auto manufacturing sector to help develop the technologies that build the parts for the Volt?
Well, one entire plant in Hamtramck, just outside Detroit, is dedicated to the Volt production. They put out about 400 every couple days, and there are a couple thousand employees there. I would also say, since we've emerged from bankruptcy, we've invested over $5 billion in infrastructure in this country and hired about just short of 16,000 additional employees.
$5 billion for the purposes of?
All of our capital programs here in the United States.
Final question. So it's your intention as the CEO of General Motors to have the Volt lead the way towards, let's say, electric and hybrid electric vehicles, revitalizing our auto manufacturing sector by providing products that consumers would find attractive because it's going to save them money. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And I would also add that we're developing great combustion engine cars as well.
I understand that.
Efficient.
I understand that from my own district. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm pleased to have with us a member of the full committee, Mr. Wahlberg, from the great state of Michigan. With unanimous consent from the committee, we'd like for Tim to be able to join us. Before going quickly to Mr. Kelly, I just want to be clear on the question Mr. Kucinich asked. So, with the exception of NHTSA, General Motors had no Mr. Eckerson, had no conversation with folks at the White House concerning this incident.
Correct.
No conversations with people, you or anyone in General Motors had no conversation with people at TARP, in particular Mr. Mossad, who sort of handles the now defunct Auto Task Force. You had no conversations with Tim Mossad at Treasury regarding this issue.
I had a conversation with Mr. Mossad earlier this week on another general matter, and I observed to him that I was going to testify today. Other than that, no conversation.
But has anyone else at General Motors, do you know of, talked to Mr. Mossad or someone in the administration? Have any of you talked to Mr. LaHood? You or anyone at General Motors talked to Mr. LaHood about this issue?
No, sir.
Okay. You'll now yield to the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'll be brief. The question here is not about whether General Motors is making good cars, whether or not General Motors is coming back. I think those are undeniable, and I'm very happy for that. And I think the President took great pride in that last night. The question here is this, in your history, recognition, and as far as you know, a typical response to a typical catastrophic event? Is this less aggressive or more aggressive by NHTSA in their response to a mysterious fire on a brand-new automobile when there were only a few thousand in the field?
As we speak, there are about, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, about 8,000.
Right, and I was correct. I think there were about 4,000 when this occurred. You've sold about, you may be making 400 a day, but you're selling far less than that. 4,000 or less in June, July, 8,000 or so now. The question is,
yes,
when this occurred,
yes,
the director has said, administrator has said, this is what we do. It takes 6 months to do it. This is just the way it is. In your experience, would you consider this to be an aggressive response, an average response, or a little slower than average when it comes to when it lights up your phone and your people come running in and you have emergency meetings and the shit hits the fan and the alligator is around you and it's all you can focus on, even though you're bored and everybody else had something else in mind for you that day? As you compare it to other events that have happened to all great automobile companies, was this more aggressive, typical, or, quite frankly, a little less speedy?
Thank you for your colorful description of my daily routine.
Been there, done that at a smaller scale.
I understand. I would describe it as proportional. We tried to replicate, first we had to find what we suspected to be the root cause. Then we had to try to replicate it in the field. We crashed and tried to simulate the same outcome we had in the May-June time frame. We could not do that. Subsequently, when they drew the battery out of the car and then impaled it with a steel rod and then spun it, it took a while to get it, and then it took 7 days after it was impaled in order to replicate a similar situation. So I would say, given all the complexities associated with this new technology and the fact that we couldn't replicate it in the field again, it would be proportional.
Okay, I'll take proportional as an interesting answer that I'm not sure what it means, but I appreciate your candor. Last question. Lithium-ion, relatively new technology for you, not new technology to the world. It's 20-year-old use in all kinds of things, including all of our cell phones. The aviation industry has regulated volume of it, all kinds of other things. Do you think you're behind the power curve and need to play catch-up on lithium-ion? You described not knowing how to replicate that. Is that one of the problems with going forward on a mass basis with large volumes of a new, basically other than sealed lead-acid battery that you've historically used?
Well, arguably, we're teamed with probably one of the leaders, not the leader in battery technology in the world, and that's LG Chem out of Korea. And they built a plant in Holland, Michigan, to supply not only ourselves but other competitors in the same market. I would say that we're a leader in this. We understand the battery technology well. We have a battery lab specifically to study the technology and the evolution and the improvement that we expect over years.
I wasn't trying to ask what you were doing, because I know you're doing that, but in fairness, it's a little bit of catch-up. I mean, the American automobile companies, including your previous leased automobile, you're playing catch-up on all-electric cars and even hybrid, and I applaud you for doing it. But from a safety standpoint, don't you think that if you had it to do over again, you would have been and would have worked with NHTSA to be a little more aggressive in public confidence by doing what you needed to do sooner? In other words, 6 months of continuing to sell a car that could, and turns out would, potentially explode and needed dramatically different safety procedures. Didn't we find as a country that you shouldn't have kept selling this relatively new car at the way you were?
The lithium-ion battery, as you know, is well used throughout the industry. The one protocol change that I think we did learn as an industry and is now incorporated, in fact, General Motors is leading the Society of Automotive Engineers in how to handle not only with first and second responders, but that we need to have certain protocols that are consistent and uniform, not only for General Motors battery electric cars, but around the globe. And that is that we are going to depower not disengage, but depower the battery after a crash. And I think that alone is a huge step forward. The additional work we did to support and shed the load around the battery is a huge step forward. I don't think it's monumental, but it's a good step forward that when we did crash 5 cars after this minor enhancement, perfect. So I think there's lessons learned, but at the same time, I don't think there was ever an imminent threat to any customer when you have anywhere from 7 to 21 days to remove yourself from the car if there is an accident. After 25 million miles on the road for this car, there's never been an incident anywhere close to this. There have been no injuries. And so we felt, as we found an extreme simulated lab fire that took 7 days, that this car was safe. But as I said in my opening comments, we weren't satisfied with this. We wanted to address the issue with our customers. We offered them loaner cars. We bought the cars back. We made the adjustments, and they're being implemented over the next month.
So to characterize it, just to make sure your testimony is understood, it's fair to say that what you've learned is the entire nation of repair facilities, salvage yards, and other people involved in the automotive industry are going to have to learn and adapt a lot of new procedures that are continuing to evolve if we're going to ensure safety of handling of these new components, both because of high voltage and potential fire and explosion. That's what you've learned from this, is that those of us who aren't we get out of the car, but when we go to the salvage yard, they need to know it. The tow truck company needs to know it. All the other people need to know it. That is, in fact, the risk that you found after 6 months.
Before we launched this car, Mr. Chairman, we conducted nationwide safety tours across the country to make sure that the public safety was paramount. That's a core value of General Motors. We talked to the National Fire Protection Agency, the International Association of Firefighters, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the Association of Public Safety Communications Officers, fire chiefs, police chiefs, 911 call centers, to make sure that we had this understood. We've now trained over 15,000 people across the nation on these safety protocols. We're going to have to go back and make sure that it's well understood, the new safety protocols. So I think every organization and individual should evolve and learn, and we've learned some lessons here that I think will benefit the entire industry, not just General Motors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. CEO. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we're pleased to be joined by Representative Conley and Maloney. We have 4 minutes left in this vote, but only 60-some folks have voted. So if Mr. Cummings wants to,
I'm going to be very quick.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Yeah. First of all, Mr. Anderson, as a member of the Board of Visitors of Naval Academy, I just want to congratulate you on being named graduate of the year. Thank you. That's wonderful. I want to make sure you heard what I said. I don't want collateral damage from this hearing, and so you, as the head of GM, you're assuring the public, and I want listen up, press, that the vote is a safe vehicle. Is that right?
Yes, sir. And actually, I view this as a positive. It's our chance to get this before the American people. You represent the American people to get our story before you. We've taken out ads in the papers today, coincident with this, that the investigation has been complete. I do think there has been collateral damage. We're going to have to work hard to get it back, and today is a good start. So.
Well, I want to thank you for your leadership, and I want to take this moment to thank all the employees of GM for producing such a great product. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. We're going to take it'll be about a 20-minute break. We'll be back for Mr. Kelly and then some of our full committee folks who may want to ask questions, but we'll keep that as quick as we can. I want to congratulate you, too. And frankly, I appreciate the attitude you just expressed in your last answer. So the committee stands in recess for 20 minutes, more or less.